Yoshihiro Togashi, the mad lad, has done it again. The succession contest has reached a whole new level with the deaths of at least 2 princes potentially imminent, and we're not stopping there because there is also a potentially even a third. So this chapter was a bit wow because it was pretty much exactly what we predicted happening last week on 2 fronts. We called Hulkenberg's mother being first Queen Unma and Hulkenberg having possessed Balsamilko Might, which I only point out because Hunter x Hunter is insanely difficult to predict. It's incredibly unusual that we get anything right, let alone 2. But we pick up with our assassination attempts from Balsamilko Might. He's planning on killing Hulkenberg in court, and Togashi gives us this absolutely adorable diagram of Might using his lawyer credentials to cross-examine Hulkenberg and use this as an opportunity to plant the TSK-17. By the way, I think this chapter answered why the TSK-17 name was censored in the official English release, because Might does specifically mention that it has pandemic potential. And if you're not familiar with how weekly manga gets translated, the translators have these chapters way in advance. They don't just get them the week of, so I imagine that Viz saw the word pandemic in this chapter and then retroactively decided to censor the name of the agent in the previous chapter so that they didn't get into any pandemic-related issues, whatever they may be. Regardless, what happened here is an unmitigated disaster for Benjamin's faction. Might thought that because all of Hulkenberg's guards were absent or otherwise accounted for, that Hulkenberg wouldn't be able to use his Nen ability because they all essentially act as his living Nen batteries. But this is what I was talking about in the previous video. Might went into this situation without anything close to a working knowledge of Hulkenberg's Nen ability. Because what appears to have happened is that Hulkenberg has sourced some supporters amongst the public, which isn't too difficult to find because he has very revolutionary ideas. He's quite the polarizing prince. People either love him or hate him. And to those who are loyal, they've all now been marked with opinion from Hulkenberg's guardian spirit beast, which has transformed them into quite literal supporters of Hulkenberg. I don't want to understate this because what's happening here is pretty damn big. This image that Togashi drew of Hulkenberg and his public supporters contains more raw power than almost any singular faction aboard the Black Whale 1. There's maybe a couple of exceptions like the Zodiacs or the Phantom Troop. If they got together, they might be able to outscale it, but Hulkenberg and his loyalists are the ones causing the rumblings that can be felt all throughout the Black Whale and were flagged by Shikaku as an overwhelming force. And this is why Might has taken it upon himself to assassinate the Hulkenberg, because he is about to spiral out of control. But we do finally get the name of his Nen ability, which is very depressingly interesting. Possession Arrow is in fact called Grimmel Les Dissonances, which is a reference to a classical music orchestra named Les Dissonances, which was founded by David Grimmel. Looking it up, the orchestra was founded upon the principle of playing together and enjoying music as a shared experience. So that's pretty perfect for Hulkenberg's Nen ability because it is a shared experience. Hulkenberg cannot use it alone. He needs his Nen orchestra, but like most Nen abilities, this also has a secondary name, which is the Japanese title for the book We Need to Talk About Kevin, which sounds like a rather hilarious title, but is in fact a novel about a fictional school shooting from the perspective of the shooter's mother. And when I say shooter, in the novel, Kevin uses a crossbow to shoot, so that's how we're tying into Hulkenberg here, and the Japanese title for this book is The Boy Fired a Cruel Bow. So I don't know, this isn't making me feel great about Hulkenberg. I think it shows a lot about his current mental state that this is the ability that was conjured as a result of his needs and desires. And when you combine it with the principles of the classical orchestra, Les Dissonances, it's almost like saying, let's commit murder together. And it's not lost on me that Togashi chose the name of a book that primarily features Kevin's mother. And in this chapter, he also reveals that First Queen Unma is Hulkenberg's mother, who is very much encouraging his participation in the contest. Unma is very proud of her son in this chapter, which I also think says a lot about her. I think she's very strategic and not at all adverse to bloodshed, and very proud of her children for engaging in it. Before we move on though, the reason stated for Hulkenberg being raised by Second Queen Dwasel was so that he could avoid being assassinated by his brothers Benjamin and Saraynik, because the queen hierarchy is just as, if not more important than the order of succession for the princes. That's why Saraynik can refuse Benjamin's orders, whereas Zhang Lei can't, because Saraynik holds the same queen ranking as Benjamin, which is higher than Zhang Lei, despite having a lower prince ranking than Zhang Lei. Although interestingly, Benjamin himself doesn't seem to believe this Hulkenberg revelation. He thinks it's just an internet rumor, but it's like, Benjamin, mate, have you looked at the dude's face? Hulkenberg looks exactly like both you and your mother. Now, there's also been a lot of suspicion that this revelation implies that Unma favors Hulkenberg, but I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. I think she may have just been providing Hulkenberg with an even chance to inherit the throne, although Unma may have a soft spot for Hulkenberg because he's her youngest and therefore cutest, and wouldn't it be fun if he murdered everyone? I should say that even with this revelation, beyond fatherhood is still not quite off the table. But the craziest thing is that Hulkenberg himself seems to know that he's Unma's child, because it's implied that he's the one speaking to her on the telephone in this chapter, and they seem to have quite a decent relationship. It reminds me of the time that I told my mom I got my first job on a major musical. She was so proud of me, just like Unma is so proud of Hulkenberg. It's a very sickly sweet dynamic. And I have to reiterate how incredibly uneasy I feel about Hulkenberg at the moment though, because I'm starting to see a pretty horrifying bigger picture as to what may be happening here. So what's happening currently, right, is that Hulkenberg has used his possession arrow, his Grimoire Les Dissonances, to take control of Balsamilkomite's body, and Wario, one of Hulkenberg's followers, who's currently being interrogated by Steiner, revealed that Hulkenberg is going to die soon. Now combine that with the fact that Hulkenberg's ability relies on finding people with 100% pure loyalty and devotion to him, and what I'm starting to see is a bit of a Jesus. It's very possible that Hulkenberg may allow his body to achieve the medical definition of death while he has fun and strolls around in Might's body for a bit, and things all seem very sad. A few days pass, let's pull out a number at random, let's say 3 days pass, and then Hulkenberg kills himself in Balsamilkomite's body, and his consciousness returns to his body. I don't know if this is actually possible, but if it were, then this would give the appearance that Hulkenberg has been resurrected. He has risen again, and his disciples could witness this because they're surrounding Hulkenberg's hospital bed at this very moment. And by the way, I use the word disciples because there are exactly 12 of them. In the shot where Hulkenberg is aiming at Might, Togashi has drawn exactly 12 Hulkenberg supporters behind him, the exact same amount of disciples that a certain Jesus had. So those disciples, they witnessed the Hulkenberg resurrection, and they then go on to go wow and spread the good word, which then converts more believers. Hulkenberg's spirit beast goes on to mark them, and he just keeps converting and gaining more and more power for each person who believes in him. Usually I wouldn't be so quick to draw religious parallels, but Togashi is a big enjoyer of incorporating religious themes, particularly from Christianity, and it would not surprise me if this is what he's building Hulkenberg up to become in this contest. Alternatively, what Hulkenberg could be doing is just abandoning his body completely, and he's becoming completely untraceable for the rest of the contest. Sort of like what Chrollo did to Hisoka in Heaven's Arena, where he kept taking on other people's appearances with convert hands, so that Hisoka never knew where Chrollo was. I don't know though, I feel like it would be difficult to assume the Karkin throne with the body of some guy. I feel like at the very least you'd need to do it with the body of another legal prince. And there's some potential for that, although it relies on Hulkenberg being able to use his Nen ability in someone else's body, which may not be the case. But if he can, then he may be positioning himself to take Benjamin's body. And speaking of Benjamin here, I've got to give him a lot of credit, because he doesn't buy for a second that he's definitely speaking to Might in this chapter, and from the very get-go, Benjamin is semi-correctly assuming that Might is being manipulated. It's very clever, but I need to emphasize this. Benjamin is only capable of this thought because Might primed him to think it. Funnily enough, in the last video, we went over how Might brought up the first come, first serve rule of manipulation, and in this chapter, Benjamin is using that knowledge to make a sound judgment in this scenario, because that's Balsamilkomite's assessment to Benjamin. You give him all of the information and he can use it, but Might is now gone, and therefore so is Benjamin's information. He was Benjamin's primary counsel and the guy that was holding this whole faction together, and I do think that Benjamin is going to seriously struggle from here on out. The key thing here is that if Hulkenberg's death is confirmed, then Benjamin may actually trust Might again, because that would theoretically mean that his mission was completed. So this really could be a situation where Hulkenberg is prepared to kill his own body just to take down or take over Benjamin's. Either way, I'm not loving Benjamin's position at the moment, especially because it doesn't seem like Benjamin Baton has activated, indicating that either Might didn't have a Nen ability to pass on to him, or that Might is not technically dead. His consciousness may have left or been buried in his body, but Hulkenberg's possession of Might is a way around alerting Benjamin Baton, which looking back on things actually does appear to be the case, because we do actually see another of Benjamin's soldiers in this chapter. His name is Vict, and he's the one who Might sees performing military sign language right before the arrow hits. And his appearance here is an incredibly big deal, because Vict went missing in chapter 389 after being sent to kill Hulkenberg, and it's heavily implied that Hulkenberg used Grimoire Les Dissonances on him. After which point we see Benjamin note that Vict is still alive because he hasn't inherited Vict's Seranic's Nen ability, and so the Vict we see in this chapter is almost certainly one of Hulkenberg's guards in his body sent to stall Might so that Hulkenberg had enough time to line up his shot. But do you know what the true boss maneuver would be? Even if Hulkenberg could use his Nen ability, he probably won't be able to use it on Benjamin because he needs his disciples around him. But you know what he could use? I think he could use the chemical weapon that Balsamilka might just happen to have on his body at the time of possession. And given that it has a non-0% chance of spreading and causing a pandemic, Hulkenberg could set it loose in Benjamin's room, kill a massive chunk of his soldiers, including Might himself, and then casually return to his own body. There's so much crazy potential for how this could go down. And right now, the only hope I see for Benjamin is his Guardian Spirit Beast. It's been kept deliberately unexplored by Togashi. Along with Werbel's Spirit Beast, it's the only one that, for whatever reason, Togashi has refused to give us any information pertaining, and it may be Benjamin's one way out of this, although it could result in an awkward interaction, because if the Guardian Spirit Beast recognizes that Hulkenberg is in Might's body, then it would become powerless to do anything against him. Guardian Spirit Beasts cannot attack princes or other Guardian Spirit Beasts. So it'll be interesting to see how that interaction works if we ever get anywhere near a scenario like that. It looks like that's where we're heading, but who knows? In any case, after this, Benjamin receives a delightful letter. Because this is one of those chapters that also takes a slight step backwards. We see what happened before Fugetsu arrived in Benjamin's room in the previous chapter. And during this section, we discover that all princes read their letters except for Hulkenberg, who is unconscious, 13th Prince Mariam, and 4th Prince Seradnik. Now with Mariam, he and his faction are currently in what could be a completely separate reality from the rest of the ship, so they're not actually physically capable of receiving a letter at the moment. With the 4th Prince though, as always, he's a bit more of an intriguing case, because I could see this being something as simple as Seradnik just doesn't care. I hesitate to give him credit at the moment for something along the lines of predicting some sort of Nen trap and refusing to meet any potential conditions that the letter presents. I mean, he is an Nen genius, and I think at this stage he is capable of coming to such a conclusion, but my gut feeling says that he just doesn't care. Right now, his sole focus is on learning Nen and having more fun in the world of Nen. Anything else is a distraction, including the succession contest itself. He's been refusing to go to banquets, which is why Tebepa has quietly severed her alliance with him, and he's not even trying to deal with the mess happening on the lower tiers with his mafia family, the Heili. The man gives no shits, although I think there is one option to think about. I don't think this is very likely, but why not offer it? What if Seradnik did read the letter, except he did so using parallel future, and then changed events to make it look like he hadn't read it? Not so much because he's trying to do something sneaky and get information that he knows that others don't think that he knows, even though it's information that was designed for him. No, forget all that crap. He did it just to test himself to see if he could. But regardless, what this means is that Fugetsu now has access to all of the rooms of each prince, except for the 3 who did not read the letter, and so everyone who is not them now has a potentially catastrophic vulnerability. Most of all, Loserus, who I am still shocked that we are flat out planning to kill. Our good guys are plotting a murder. Tomorrow night, Kacho Beast, Melody, and Kaiser are going to try and assassinate a Kakin prince, based on what I'm going to call, at best, circumstantial evidence. And I should also say that there's a translation error in the scans for chapter 403, which is when Kaiser is talking to Wario, and he states that he's backing Prince Benjamin because Benjamin is protecting Fugetsu. I don't know how this happened, maybe some late night translation, but Kaiser is actually talking about Hulkenberg, not Benjamin. Kaiser is saying that he's backing Hulkenberg, which makes infinitely more sense, considering that he's talking to a Hulkenberg loyalist, and Hulkenberg is the figure that most of the lower princes are putting their hopes in. But there's also a very important man who appears in this chapter, who I imagine that most people have completely forgotten about, if indeed they were ever aware of him to begin with. But we see Kaiser talking to Steiner, and he was also briefly in the last chapter, and he may not look it, but he is one of, if not the single most important person aboard the Black Whale 1. He's essentially in charge of the entire Dark Continent expedition. He was hired by the V5 to keep Beyond Netero in check, however he plans on doing that. But in chapter 400, Kaiser alerted Steiner to the possibility of Benjamin declaring martial law aboard the vessel, which I imagine is probably in an attempt to use Steiner's authority to help Melody and Fugetsu. I'm not entirely sure at the moment, but we often see these two together. Steiner's been accompanying Kaiser a lot because he's now starting to become very worried that the vessel won't even make it to his actual mission, which is the Dark Continent. But we have a lot happening right now, so much happening. As Zhanglei's Nen curiosity is about to clash once more with Kurapika, who, the absolute mad lad that he is, plans on revealing Fugetsu's letter to Oito in an effort to stall this contest once more. Look, I trust Kurapika's judgment, but I don't know if this is going to have the desired effect. Just as with all of his other decisions during this arc, it is a massive gamble. We're going to get into everything happening with Kurapika and Zhang Lei particularly in the next video.